somebody that really grew up. Her father and uncle were in the field of organization development. Mary, I don't know if you know when I first met you, but you were the president of ATD in Miami when I moved to Miami in 1985. I was really impressed. And needless to say, and luckily, Mary and I have stayed connected over the almost 40 years. So thank you, Mary. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, we're gonna like to ask you a couple questions today, and I know this will be really valuable to a lot of our viewers. So, could you just kind of tell us about your journey in OD, because you really were on the cusp of when OD became known as OD?
I actually started when I was 7 years old, assembling training notebooks. I spent 13 summers in Bethel, Maine for MTL institutes, and I started also attending the teenage tea groups. So it's been a while, but I didn't go to school too. I have a master's in public administration and a master's in political science. My doctorate is in business administration, and I've had the pleasure of working for Metro-Dade County government, where I worked in the county manager's office. I worked in an electronics company. I have run master's programs at St. Thomas University, adjuncted a lot of places, and had some wonderful clients who have helped me understand some of the keys to success, some of the surprises that can derail change. And also, I have to admit to having some failures where things just did not go as planned. So I've been working in the field and continue to learn from it. And it's just a real joy to work at OD.
Excellent, Mary. Thank you so much. Well, tell us what you've been doing, for in your career as in OD after you left some of the private companies or in the government. Tell us a little bit more about that. What
what I found out really was that we needed more of a focus on implementation. I know that in your action research, Nancy, implementation is one of the phases, but it's the phase that I have been focusing on most, in addition to planning, because I think that we in the field sometimes are not able to convey the results that really will motivate our clients to sticking with the original idea, but also adapting as change becomes necessary. So I have found that many of my leaders feel that their role really is just vision. And I have a phrase that I like to use is vision without execution is a hallucination. And we've got a lot of leaders who are hallucinating. So I try to work with leaders to point out that their role is the vision, but the vision is not what people should be accepting. The vision is trying to create the awareness and the acceptance of the current reality. So later on, we can have a really full commitment to change. But I've also found that a lot of change is introduced before people are actually given the skills to do it. So the vision actually scares people because they haven't had the training or experience or practice. I've also found that most of the benefits that are introduced when change is announced really are benefits for the organization and have not been articulated for the implementation team. So I look at the word incentives rather than the word motivation. Motivation is an emotion, and it comes and it goes. But we want something where it can be sustained. So we really need to have our leaders and change planners look at what it is that we can do that the people who are implementing will see a benefit that they can identify with. And these are basically non-tangible. Most people think the only benefit that counts is salary, but we know that things like feeling that they're making a contribution, feeling like they're growing, feeling like they're a member of the team, there are a lot of intangible incentives that we need to tap into and connect to the change effort. But if we get their commitment and acceptance, then the question is, are we as an organization providing the resources to let them be successful? My experience has been that the resources are provided for the launch, but they aren't allocated throughout the whole change process. And frequently, the resources available at one point in time get reallocated elsewhere. So when a change is introduced, there can be some very significant resource shortfalls. And I'm not just talking about dollars, I'm talking about staff, equipment, facilities, all the resources that are necessary to make something really happen. And of course, the last key shortfall that I've noticed is in terms of action planning. The plan usually is very specific around the launch. Who's going to speak? When is it going to speak? When is it going to be announced? What are we going to publicize? What information are we going to give out? All that is planned. But what is missing is the plan for the entire change project. Because if we don't do that, staff may not be available when we need them. We will find that metrics are confusing. I think I've been successful, but somebody else thinks I have been incomplete in my effort. So I have been looking at change from a very concrete steps that need to be taken within an organization to make change happen. It doesn't always get the attention that it needs. And so I've enjoyed that. And what I'm trying to do now is to let people know some of the do's and don'ts at each one of those stages: vision, skills development, incentives, resources, and action planning. Because so many of those missteps can easily have been worked around if they were recognized in advance. You talk in your action planning model about entry, but I almost think there's another period where we have to get into a contracting kind of phase, and that's when the plan is developed and we're getting ready to implement. We have to let leaders know that their job is not just at the beginning; they have to be there throughout.
So Marriott, we teach the action research model in our programs. And but I really love what you're saying, and I totally agree. The upfront buy-in from the senior leader, and then also making sure that they understand their role and the fact that they really own the problem. And sometimes I also remind our students about Edward Deming and how we have the 6 steps to problem solving model, because that's really useful to weave that over the action research model, because it went a little bit deeper when people were working on identifying the root cause, coming up with the solutions and testing the solutions, and then when they were implementing it. So I just wanted to throw that in and just let you get resettled here. But Mary, would you tell people about, would you mind sharing some of the lessons that you learned when you were working with clients? I think that's really helpful.
Yes, I think I mentioned the importance of educating the leader. I will also sort of challenge the assumption that change can only happen from top down. I have seen some wonderfully effective changes come from the middle up. And so let's make sure that we can understand that change can literally happen from all different levels of an organization. I also would like to make sure that people understand what I call the 3 different aspects of change. There's that personal change, which is very important. Then there's this project change, which usually is within a section of the organization. And then there's what I will call organizational wide change. And I think it's really important to be able to articulate what is the level of change that we're going after at this point in time. So I would say those are imperial and imperative to making things clear. I also think that we also need to be clear about the skills level necessary, because I find that some organizations provide what I will call basic level skills, but people are never really given a chance to practice them until the change is upon them. And sometimes there's a higher level of skill necessary, which I will call a capability, which means I know how to do it well enough that I can do it without supervision. We don't need expert levels on most of these things, but we need more than what I will call basic skills. And I guess I would also encourage people to look at the specific fear that has arisen from the change. I find fear comes from the fear of what's going to happen during implementation, fear of what the outcome is in the short term, and also fear of long-term impact, the ramifications that could happen. And this frequently involves a culture change. So I think that we really need to be more articulate about some of the details that need to be addressed. And again, specify, what's skills level, what's the fear, and stay open-minded. It's interesting to me that when change advocate is open-minded, the audience also reflects that open-mindedness. But if we create a defensive thing, if we try to just sell an idea, we won't get that same level of cooperation and assistance.
Mary, I was wondering, when do you think that you should discuss the implementation phase with your client? I mean, so we kind of like look at it step by step, but I really, based on what you're saying right now, feel that that discussion needs to take place much earlier about what that process is going to look like.
I would agree with you that needs to start early. And I think it needs to start by our listening to what the client's expectations are. Timing is one of the interesting things. There's always a lot of time spent on the launch, but not as much time spent on implementation. But it's an interesting interaction because I can have that discussion with my client. But then as I collect data and I analyze it and feed it back, I got to do another round of expectation setting with the client. And as the plan develops, I am going to help with the planning process, but I'm going to be involving other people. So again, other issues will start to surface. And again, this constant willingness to adjust and modify has to be part of the expectations of a client. I don't want them to see me as someone who can, quote, guarantee, unquote, that everything will happen as scheduled. I actually had one client where we're doing an ERP, which is changing multiple legacy systems into one system. And it was going, fairly well. But then the organization decided to do an IPO. Well, you don't work on an IPO where you're trying to show that you're profitable at the same time that you're changing systems. And so we need to have a larger context discussion with our clients, not just about the project, but what else might be happening at the same time. Because that IPO really shut down any new introduction of systems.
So you're constantly teaching the client the process of change and then letting them experiment with it, and then asking them how they feel about the results and maybe giving them a little bit of feedback. So, Kurt Lewin always said that you're in action and then in training together. It's a continuous process of learning. So we shouldn't forget that, right?
Also, maybe stretch it a little bit more and say that I feel it's my responsibility to transfer my skills to the client. I know that to me that's an ethical issue, but the client has to understand that in addition to my learning about the organization, they will be learning about the change process. And some clients are more than willing to do that. And some clients just feel like, they hired me and that was my job. And again, an important aspect to discuss with your clients.
And there's different techniques that we can use to get them to own it, right? By having a learning wall and asking them what would they like, what tool would they like to use or what process they would like to use, and just make sure that we're always involving them so that they actually in the end feel like, oh, I did this. We came up with this ourselves. So I borrow a lot from Reg Revan's action learning model.
Mm-hmm.
That the client then has ownership over the change rather than trying to make it our responsibility. But Mary, this is so great. But could you share some more about a best practice that maybe we could borrow from and use as an example with our own clients? What are some?
I think that one of the comments that I would make is that we have to make sure that we're reading the client, but also the folks that will be involved in implementing. I actually had a client that was very gung-ho, but when I talked to the implementers, they told me, we're on the B team. I didn't know what the B team meant. So they told me, I'm going to be here when it starts. I will be here when it ends. Without the resources, I'm not going to be doing anything. And so, I think that we have to be better listeners, as well as people who are able to offer, clear, helpful insights. We need to listen to people because I do know organizations where implementers are on the B team because it seems like every 6 to 9 months there's a new project. So they're just going to wait it out. And so I think that if we can make sure that we're listening, not just to our clients, but to the implementers and listening carefully, we will be much more effective at helping them understand their role in carrying out the goal that everybody's trying to achieve. But it takes listening to make that understanding happen. And I think awareness is one level, but I think that acceptance and commitment are 2 other levels that we have to reach to make sure the goals that are sought are the goals that are achieved.
All right. And also, can you talk about a time when you were disappointed in one of your projects that you were working on?
I was working on a technology change within an organization, and they wanted their implementers to help them by a lot of data input. But it turned out those implementers were being graded every day how many entries they made. But then their system went down. So the implementers were left being told to enter data, but they couldn't because the system was down, but they had to get rid of all the input because they couldn't have anything on their desk at the end of the day. And so what happened was the men's room and the ladies' room, and as well as the lunch boxes going in and out, were filled with paper that was just being disappeared because they had one performance standard, but the system prevented them from doing it. Needless to say, the effort failed. So, the contributors, when we're talking about resources, systems availability has to be included in that planning process. I can say one more. I had one client who was a very charismatic speaker and really thought that his role was to inspire. So he announced a change that was to empower, free, and serve. It was beautifully delivered. They had signs in the cafeteria. They had tags on their name bags. The trouble was nobody knew what it meant. Some people thought they were going to be empowered at the front line. Some people thought they were going to serve customers. And after a month, it was finally found out that it was to implement new distribution centers and to operate 7 days a week instead of 6. I mean, the words were glorious, but there were no specifics. People were inspired, but as we both know, inspiration lasts a very weak of an eye. Some clients have a pre-existing idea of what it takes to change, and his was he had to be charismatic.
I've experienced that myself. Mary, I was just thinking, what would you say to other OD professionals that don't have as much experience as you have? What is the best way to continue to learn in spite of all, we have some successes, but we have a lot of difficulties in our role because it's very difficult to be an OD person, but we love it because it is so challenging and because we have this innate wisdom and all these tools that were given to us. Can you talk a little bit about that what will continue to help us grow and become better at what in our field?
Well, I think you're doing it, Nancy. I mean, I think you're having webinars. I think you have a newsletter. I think you established a community where people could ask questions of one another. I think that most of us want to be helpful to the people who are coming up in the field. And I actually think you created a structure where that can happen. But there's nothing that helps people more, I think, than being able to talk not just about the successes, but about the disappointments and the failures. I will mention that my father worked for 2 years for an international financial organization, and he actually wrote a book on why it failed. And I think we need to have more people be willing to talk about the disappointments that we encounter, not just the successes.
Thank you, Mary. That's good, really, really good insight. Let me see what else. Let's just what would be something that you remember from your uncle and your father that you would want to share with us? What were some of their greatest insights or lessons learned?
I think that their willingness to listen rather than judge. My father actually started off as a minister. So I think he had quite a few skills around listening and accepting. Sometimes I think that if I'm hired as an expert, I'm just supposed to propose things. I'm not supposed to be asking questions. And I think you've experienced that. When people, you say, I want to collect data, they say, well, I have the data. You don't need to collect it. And we need to get more information than we have. One of the things I've done is I've developed 6 different areas for people to collect information, and I call them mindsets. And for me, I can't change people, but I can change the way they think if I know what their mindset is. And I can influence and open their point of view when I look at their mindset. I think we look a lot at their personality. I would add that we need to look at the goals that they're working on and what they really want to achieve. If somebody wants quality on the senior team and somebody else wants new customers, they're not going to agree until you start to meld those 2 goals. And so I think listening and bridging differences within a change team or a senior team is really one of the skills that can quickly produce results. I actually had a situation where a client was arguing with a large vendor, and they were threatening to tear up the contract. In 4 hours, I got them to agree because we were talking about what is it that you want, what it is you want, how can we bring things together. So if we can start looking at mindsets that are situational rather than looking at something about my personality, which is basically fixed, I think we could do a lot to bring people into harmony, which is where I think they can take action together.
Oh, thanks, Mary. That's really good advice. Well, we're coming kind of to the end of our podcast. But I was just wondering, last week, I was just want to recap. Last week, David Cooper Ryder spoke to us about this is OD's Earthshot moment with the global initiatives that are going on with the UN. You know, granted that they started this in like, I think 2015, but it's growing and more business leaders are going to the summit yearly. And David said, you know, by the year 2050, there's going to be a need for over 1 million OD professionals. So what are your thoughts about, you know, our future in the field of organization development?
Well, I would agree with him. And I would say that our definition of leadership has to expand because to me, the leader is not a change agent. Then they're just a manager. They're managing the status quo. So I think that while we need OD people, as was suggested, I also think that we need to redefine leadership into being a person that can identify what changes are necessary, as well as making sure that they can execute them. So I would say it's true for OD professionals, but I think it's true for all leaders everywhere.
Thank you, Mary. That's great. That was a really great insight. All right. Well, we can't wait till your book is finally published and you can present that to our group as well. We're excited about it. We're going to promote it. So mention the book that you wrote that has the different mindsets in it, because I have that book and I really do love that, but maybe people might want to get a copy of that.
The name of the book is Situational Mindsets. Again, it's context driven rather than personality driven. And I've decided to write a fun book for my 4th book. It's going to be called Leadership Saving the Herd. And so it will be a fable.
It's timely though. It's timely. So Mary did a presentation for us. I think it was in 2018. I'm not positive if it was, I'm hoping it was, no, I think it was 2018. And I think it's still on our YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to check that out, you might be able to see that presentation she made on the situational mindset, because it might have been 2019, because we were just going into the COVID, and you were saying how that, you know, using that model might really help leaders when they're going through the changes that were occurring at that particular time and still continuing. So just wanted to give that resource to, or that reference to anybody that might be interested. Thank you again, Mary. We'll talk to you soon.
I look
And
forward to it.
loved it. You take care now. Have a great summer.